Hello and welcome to the International News Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Dunicic. Now, before we begin today, I want to remind you to subscribe to our channel and join our growing international community. Also, at the end of the video, comment what you think and let's have a discussion. Now, let's get right into our story today, which concerns coronavirus and more specifically, coronavirus and vaccines in Israel. Today, the Israeli government approved and began a vaccination campaign for children aged 5 to 11. Now, the reason that this new campaign was approved is that Israel recently just came out of a fourth wave of coronavirus. Now, while COVID infections were rampaging through the country just recently, in recent weeks, daily cases have actually subsided and they have been relatively low. Now, generally speaking, Israel as a country has actually had a really good reaction to the coronavirus. Israel has a population of roughly more than 9 million people. Now, they have recorded a total of 1.3 million coronavirus cases since the beginning of the pandemic. Of these 1.3 million cases, only 8,100 resulted in deaths. Now, I understand that the numbers 1.3 million and 8,100 sound like a lot, but relatively speaking, in terms of the general pandemic, and comparatively speaking, in terms of other countries, these numbers and these indicators are significantly less and much better. And the reason for this is Israel has a very advanced and progressive medical and health system. And finally, despite the fact that Israel more or less has a Western culture, one key difference is that they tend to be more collectivist than individualistic. And the reason for this is because the Israeli people and Jews in general have gone through a lot of persecutions in their history. And they understand that during times of turmoil, of trouble, of chaos, it is best to stick together. So there has been a lot of personal responsibility put on getting vaccinated, on respecting mask mandates, on respecting the lockdown that occurred during the beginning of the pandemic. And all of this has been successfully done while Israel has been going through a 2-year political crisis. Between 2019 until recently this year, Israel was not able to form a stable government. And despite this, they have been able to collectively give a good answer and respond properly to the COVID-19 virus. Now, recently, the health ministry, despite the decrease in cases, has determined that it is best for children between the ages of 5 and 11 to get vaccinated. And the reason for this is that it has found that in recent cases, a significant majority are children and teenagers. And nearly half of all active COVID-19 cases inside of Israel are actually in children between the ages of 5 and 11. Now, while anti-vaccination or anti-vax sentiment has generally not been a problem in Israel, especially when compared to, let's say, Eastern European countries that have a massive distrust of governments where anti-vax sentiment is as high as 60 to 70%, depending on what country you're in, Israel generally does not have these kinds of sentiments. Now, that being said, vaccinating children is still going to be a hard sell. Currently speaking, demand for vaccinations for children between the ages of 5 and 11 is very low. And that's very understandable. While someone is willing to put themselves personally at risk, and the vaccines are not risky, they're significantly less risky than contracting coronavirus. But even a new medicine during a new virus or a new pandemic can be scary. And many people are willing to put themselves on the line and get vaccinated to protect others. But put their children on the line to protect others, most people are not going to be willing to do that. Now, despite this, or more precisely because of this, the Israeli government is going to take on a major inoculation campaign. More specifically, they are going to publicly promote vaccinating children between the ages of 5 and 11. And that campaign began today. Prime Minister Naftali Bennet himself took his 9-year-old son David and had him vaccinated, holding his hand and making a huge photo op out of it. And while his son David was being vaccinated, Naftali Bennet was telling parents, get your children vaccinated, not just for their safety, but for the safety of others. And this is very true. Vaccinating children is not primarily done to protect the children. A child is much less likely to develop serious or significant or even relevant symptoms when contracting the COVID-19 virus. However, children are not autonomous. They are dependent upon the adults around them. Children interact with their parents. They go to school and interact with their teachers. They interact with their grandparents. Children are the perfect spreader for any disease. So it's only natural that any government or health service or health entity wants to vaccinate children because it is a very good way to prevent the virus from spreading. But again, it is going to be a very hard sell because parents don't want to take any risks on their children. Now, vaccinations on children are nothing new. Virtually everyone that grew up in a Western or industrialized or modern country to go to school when they were a young kid had to get a series of vaccinations just to be able to attend class. Now, if you're from the United States, like I myself am, you could have religious or different kinds of reasons that you didn't have to get vaccinated. But the reality is that mandatory vaccinations, at least to enter public schools, are nothing new. Now, currently speaking, the Israeli government is not mandating vaccines on children, and they're probably not going to. But they're going to publicly promote and push for 5 to 11-year-olds to be vaccinated. The first indicator was Prime Minister Naftali Bennet vaccinating his son. And what can be expected is that other Israeli government officials, maybe Israeli celebrities, or people from the elite or high class or very well-renowned, well-known Israelis are going to have their own children vaccinated. We're going to see how this plays out and how it results in containing the coronavirus pandemic in Israel. And, let me know what you think. Personally, I do support vaccines. I myself am vaccinated. But if I did have a child, and I don't, but if I did have a child, I would probably be very skeptical of getting them vaccinated. But let me know what you think. Comment. Do you think the vast majority of Israelis are going to vaccinate their children? Do you think they're not going to vaccinate their children? Do you think that the pandemic is almost over? Comment anything you think. Let's just have a nice, open discussion. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.